CV4 7AL. Two computer programs developed from the Science and Technology series are available on disc for the BBC B Computer, together with a booklet for teachers. These can be obtained from GSN Educational Software, 214 Stamford Street, Ashton-under-Lyme, Lancashire, or from the Education Officer of your local ITV company.
Each year, clothing manufacturers fill the shops with their new designs, clothes in the new styles and in the new range of colours. And for thousands of years, people have coloured their clothing. Some colours were expensive to produce, and so clothes in those colours were a sign of rank. They showed your importance. In any case, coloured clothing made you look that little bit different from everybody else. And colours could be used not just for clothing, but on the body directly, to colour the hair, face, and hands. In the past, all those colours came from animals or from plants. The Roman purple came from crushed shellfish. Brilliant red coloured the uniforms of soldiers and the robes of cardinals. That colour came from an insect. Yellow came from the saffron crocus. Greens and mauves came from grasses and heathers. All this started to change late last century. An English chemist, Perkin, discovered a way of making a mauve dye, starting with laboratory chemicals. Nowadays, nearly all our dyes are manufactured by the chemical industry. The ideas for new printed patterns start as crayon and ink sketches on the designer's drawing board. Now, Diane, what are you doing here?
This is a design which has been chosen by the dress fabric industry. It's a 6-colour design and has been hand-painted and drawn by one of the Parisian studios.
One immediate problem is to find dyes that will produce just that set of colours the designer had in mind. Dye manufacturers keep colour indexes, reference books, but it's not possible to find just that right shade by looking in the colour index. And there's one other thing still to know. These are 3 samples of material: wool, cotton, and acetate. And this is a mixture of 3 different dyes. In fact, there's a red, a yellow, and a blue dye in this mixture. The dye particles in the mixture can be attracted by the fibers of the material. The dye particles form a coloured layer all around the fibre and change its colour. The problem is that not all dye particles stick to all fibres. So, what might happen with our 3 different dyes and 3 different materials? In fact, each material is dyed by one and only one of the 3 dyes in the mixture: red, yellow, or blue. The first question a colour chemist asks is, what material do you want to dye? Then you know which sort of dye to use. Only then do you think about the colour of that dye. The designer's colours are analysed one at a time, using a colour matching machine working with a computer. In the computer's memory are details of all the possible ICI dyes that could be mixed and then used on the material to produce the correct colour. At one time, this colour matching would be done by eye. Computers are more accurate. To match this colour, the computer suggests we try 2 mixtures. Either scarlet, yellow and black, or a combination of red, yellow and black. For printing, dyes are mixed with a thickener, a paste that will hold the colour to the material and prevent it spreading sideways. Small quantities of each dye recipe are prepared and mixed thoroughly with the thickener. This is just one of those 2 recipes provided by the computer to give the correct red shade in the pattern. Similar tests will be carried out for all the colours in that pattern. Small pieces of the correct material are then screen printed. The red dye is squeezed through holes in the screen and onto the material. The rod is moved magnetically. Each test print would be made in this way. Only the dyes themselves will change from one test to the next. The red dye is fixed to the material by steam. These colour test prints are just the first stage in finding the correct dye for the job. Dye particles hold onto the fibres of the material to give it colour. But if you're not careful, those dye particles can detach themselves. The hot water has taken the dye from the socks, and that dye has coloured the white clothing. This is what that t-shirt should look like. Once colour chemists have found the correct colour for the dye, they run tests to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen. That is, if you wash the clothes as they recommend. Chemists also check that sweat won't attack the dye or sunlight fade it. This shirt has faded from washing and from being in sunlight. That's what it used to look like. To check for colour fastness, chemists use a test strip, an adjacent they call it. It's made up from pieces of all the types of material you would find in an ordinary wash load. What do you think it does? A sample of the colour print is sewn onto the adjacent. The two materials are then washed together in a fixed volume of standard washing solution. The temperature of the washing machine is kept constant, and the washing time is fixed. A mixture of weak acids is used to reproduce the effects of perspiration on the dye. The colour print and adjacent are dipped in the acid and then kept in an acid sandwich for a fixed time and at a fixed temperature. Each sample gets the same amount of brilliant light from a xenon source, equivalent to many years in strong sunshine. The print is rubbed to check what amount of dye is left on the white test piece. So, Tommy, these are the results of the washing tests.
Yes, as you can see, there's a little staining on both adjacents.
Yeah.
A little more staining with recipe 2 than with recipe 1.
And what about the sunlight tests? For the light fastness test, the two samples of red dye are compared using a standard scale, varying from almost complete loss of colour to no loss at all.
Yes, both recipe 1 and recipe 2 show very, very similar light fastness. Both very good light fastness.
In fact, the two red dyes showed very little change after their time in brilliant light.
Yes, it has.
Right, and then we came to the acid perspiration test. What did that show?
We've got even less staining here on the adjacents than we saw in the wash test.
With the perspiration mixture, a white test strip is again used to detect any red dye removed by the acids. Both adjacents show very little change, with only a slight pink tinge in some places.
Showing very good perspiration fastness.
All right, and then we got to the rubbing test.
Here we see the results of dry and wet rub fastness tests. As you can see, the dry rub fastness is slightly better than the wet rub fastness. And again, we're seeing recipe 1 to be technically better than recipe 2.
Yeah, I can see staining there, and that looks quite clear. All right, so which of the two dyes will you be recommending?
Oh, we've also got to take into account the commercial situation. But in this particular case, both recipes show very similar costs. And therefore the selection on technical grounds, as you've seen with these fastness tests, is recipe 1.
So number 1 gets the vote.
That's right.
Before 1856, all dyes were natural dyes. This is a colour reference book. All these colours came from plants or from animals. With this range of dyes went the skills to colour materials or to print intricate patterns. And this is a printer's record book with all the details, with all the technical details for each pattern. It's dated 1823. The process of printing was long and complicated. Dyes were pressed onto the material by hand using wooden blocks, fixed, and then the material was washed and treated with the new colour. These prints were made slowly and expensively by hand. Nowadays, we expect to find a wide range of inexpensive, brightly coloured clothing, all because of new technology and mass production. The production of dyes has changed. And so has the machinery for printing the colour onto the material and keeping it there. Once, dyes were printed by hand. This brand new machine squeezes the colour through a screen and onto the material. The dress design produced a pattern to be made with a certain material. The colour chemists consulted their computer records to see what dyes would produce the required colour. Those dyes were tested for colour fastness, and this screen printer puts all the colours onto the material, one after another, to produce a new dress pattern.